other passion is his tribal to make sure that those who have gone before him are not forgotten. Darren Parry.
Oh, it never gets easier, and I speak everywhere. But I love being at SUU. This is my second home. And maybe I'll move down here one day. But I want you to know that a grandfather sat down with his granddaughter one day by a fire. She had been reading in her textbook at school about Native Americans, and she came to her grandfather with a question. Grandfather, why do they always talk about us like we existed in the past? It seems like they love the old stories, but they do not care about what is happening to us today. The old man smiled, sadly, poked his stick at the fire. He had lived long enough to see many changes throughout his life, but this question always stirred something deep within him. You see, he began slowly, America loves the dead Indian. They love the stories, the legends, the dances, the songs from long ago. They love looking at us in museums, frozen in time. To them, we are something from the past, a relic of history that makes them feel special, almost like they were the ones who discovered us. He sighed and looked at his granddaughter's eyes. But America does not love the living Indian, the Indian who is still here, still fighting, still trying to make a future in this land. The living Indian challenges their story because we remind them that the past is not over. We are not just a memory in your history books or in your museums. We are here standing in front of you, asking for justice, recognition, and reconciliation. The granddaughter frowned, trying really hard to understand. But why can't they love us now, like they did before? Because to love us now, grandfather said, would mean that they would have to acknowledge the harm that they have done, the land that has been taken, the promises they have broken. It is easier for them to love us when we are ghosts from the past. It's not easy to love us and love a people with needs, with voices, with futures that are in our present. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks into the sky. But we are still here, the grandfather continued. We carry our ancestors in our hearts and our future in our hands. They may want to keep us in the past, but we are walking forward. And it is our job, my granddaughter, to keep walking, to keep speaking, to keep reminding them that the living Indian is not going anywhere. The granddaughter nodded, her face illuminated by the firelight. She understood now, and she was going to fight for the rest of her life to make sure that her people are remembered in the present. As we think for a minute about this story of the dead Indian, the way America has romanticized the past while neglecting present struggles of indigenous peoples, we might ask ourselves what it truly means to remember. Maybe it's not enough to admire the stories of resiliency and survivance from a distance. You must also confront the realities of the violence, erasure, and ongoing challenges that many Native American communities still face today. The granddaughter in her story understood that true remembrance means more than honoring the past. It means fighting for justice in the future and in the present. That fight begins with truth-telling, by bringing to light the stories that have been buried or distorted. Stories of real people's lives that forever were changed by history. This is one such story. Chief Sagwitch, who was my third great grandfather, woke up as usual on the morning of January 29th in 1863. He left his lodge and surveyed the area around his camp. He could see a steaming mist on the hills to the south. He didn't quite know what it was, and he watched it until it started moving down the hill. And then he realized what was taking place. The troops from Camp Douglas had arrived. The chief wasn't surprised. He started calling to his sleeping village. They quickly awoke and gathered whatever they could find to fight with. Mostly bows and arrows. Some of the men probably had rifles, but not much ammunition. My grandmother told me that the women picked up their winnowing pans to use them for shields. He told his people to remain brave and calm. Some of our people were running towards the river and dropping into the snow. Some even dropped into the clay foxholes that had been dug along the riverbanks in the summer by the children. The army approached. They forded the river, and Colonel Connor and his men began to fire upon our people. But what are arrows compared to the rifles and sidearms of the army? The soldiers began massacring Indian men, women, and children, holding the infants by their heels while they beat their brains out on any hard surface they could find. My people were being slaughtered like wild rabbits. The massacre started early in the morning and lasted until early afternoon. The Bear River, which was slightly frozen earlier, was now starting to flow. Many of our people were jumping into the river to try to escape. If you can imagine in your mind, the blazing white snow was now brilliant red with blood. The willow trees that were used as hiding places were now bent down as if in defeat. A local Mormon recorded in his journal that once the Indians had been routed, the soldiers pulled their pistol and shot many of the wounded directly in the face at arm's length. Soldiers then began burning the lodges, killing anyone found alive inside. Many of our women were running with their children to try to escape. Almost all of them died. There was a woman named Angie Chi. She was being chased by the soldiers, but she was a brand new mother. She jumped into the river and hid under an overhanging bank. You might ask how she could jump into this frozen, cold river in January, but it's because of the many hot springs that are along the river. When Angie Chi got there, she found herself there with 10 other women who had had the same idea. They could hear the soldiers talking about where they'd gone, just above their heads on the bank. And then it happened. Angie Chi's baby started to cry. Angie Chi lived to be more than 100 years old. And she would often tell this story to the young children of Washakie, the community of Shoshone peoples. She told of running with her newborn, jumping into the river, being there with 10 other frightened women. And then she told the tale of having to drown her own baby so it wouldn't give up their location. all the while trying to tend the 7 bullet wounds that she'd already had to her own body. She watched the rest of the massacre from a hiding place. Almost all of the fatalities of the soldiers happened in the first frontal attack in the first 10 minutes. What weapons the Shoshones would have had would have been expended in those first few minutes. As the army regrouped and began to flank the encampment, the work of death intensified. They were out of ammunition and they were at the mercy of the soldiers. What may have started as a battle quickly turned into indiscriminate killing of many of my people. Following the massacre, Connor allowed a handful of Mormon settlers to walk the field. James Martineau was sickened by what he saw. In his journal, he recorded that many of the squaws were killed because they would not lie down and submit to be ravished. By nightfall, many of the people who had escaped were cold, wet, and hungry. There was no food. The soldiers had done a good job of scattering the food on the ground and setting fire to it. All of the teepees were burned to the ground except one, and that was Sagwitch's. Sagwitch was stunned. He looked at the scene. He remembered the many wonderful days that his people had spent on Beaver Creek. He sighed and turned away. Dead bodies were everywhere. The ground was frozen. He couldn't properly take care of the dead. But I think he had a thought, and I'm just thinking to myself that he would have had this thought, that he suddenly realized that there were 2 different kinds of people living in his world now. One group was greedy and wanted everything, especially the land. The other group only wanted to live and travel as they'd done for centuries. One group made their wishes and dreams come true by making themselves the conqueror at the expense of a defenseless people who only wanted to be left alone. Ralph Smith, an area settler, I think he summed up the sentiments of the locals when he said this: "You know, we looked upon the massacre as gruesome, but necessary." And then added, "The work of Patrick Edward Connor and his soldiers was nothing less than an intervention from our Heavenly Father." The morning after the massacre, local Mormons William Head, William Nelson, and William Hull traveled to the massacre site at the direction of Brigham Young to look for survivors. Hull later recorded in his journal, "We drove our sleighs as far as the river. The first sight to greet us was an old man walking, head bowed, lamenting the dead. He didn't speak to us, and we soon left, walking towards the north. Never will I forget the scene. Dead bodies were everywhere. I counted 8 deep in one place, and in several places there were 3 to 5 deep. All in all, the 3 of us independently counted more than 400 Shoshone people dead. 2/3 of that number being women and children. We found 2 Indian women alive, whose thighs had been broken by bullets. 2 little boys and 1 little girl. The little girl was badly wounded, having received 8 bullet wounds to her tiny body. We took them on our horses to the sleigh and made them as comfortable as possible. Fear of the dead was among the Shoshone people at that time. They feared that the dead would return and call to the living. Mourners would practice ritual purifications. A medicine man told the band that they should be thankful for the snow that fell on the scene of the massacre, as the new snow would cover the tracks left by the Indians who had survived. The spirits are no longer walking the grounds of Moso Dequani. There's a plaque, a monument, on the site of the massacre today, well, close to it. It was erected in 1932 by the good people of Franklin County to remember the events of that fateful day. What the monument really did for me, though, is that it gives people a reason to forget. It's self-justifying language strips us of our obligation to find out for ourselves what took place. And it tells us how it wants the past to be remembered. You decide. The plaque says this: attacks by the Indians on the peaceful inhabitants in this vicinity led to the final battle here on January 29th in 1863. The conflict occurred in deep snow and bitter cold. Scores of wounded soldiers were taken from the battlefield to the Latter-day Saint community of Franklin, Idaho. Here, pioneer women, trained through trials and necessities of frontier living, accepted the responsibility of caring for the wounded soldiers until they could be removed to Camp Douglas, Utah. 2 Indian women found alive after the encounter were given homes in Franklin. So the problem with that narrative, and there are a couple for me, is that it only gives us one perspective. The plaque teaches us that to the pioneer people, violence on the frontier was necessary for the survival of their communities. And it even showed what the consequences would be if both groups tried to share the same space. It legitimized the use of violence if it meant that their communities would be safe. What if the plaque had been written from the perspective of the Shoshone people? Maybe it would have said something like this: the massacre of the Northwestern Band of the Shoshone Nation occurred in this vicinity on January 29, 1863. Colonel Patrick Edward Connor led California volunteers from Camp Douglas, Utah, and attacked a sleeping Indian village in the early morning hours of the day. The soldiers shot, raped, bludgeoned, and bayoneted several hundred men, women, and children to their death. The Shoshone people fought back with the limited weapons available to them, but the band was all but annihilated. So which version of the massacre is correct? I suppose it depends on your perspective. That monument was never really meant to tell the story of the events of that day. It was meant to tell us how it wants the past to be remembered. What the monument really accomplished for me is it gives us a great reason to forget. The monument strips us of our obligation to find out for ourselves what took place. You see, we as humans have great memories for what we want to remember. In commemorating something like this, the battle, you forget the uglier parts of history, and you only focus on the heroism of the soldier and the saint. That's the kind of Daughters of Utah Pioneers monument that exists there today. But that narrative now becomes the story. It's not a story about my people. It becomes a story about the brave soldiers and the pioneer women who took care of them. In constructing this monument, you firm up memory and you create what I say is a false history. The massacre at Bear River was crucial to the history of southern Idaho. It marked the closing of real conflict between the white Mormon pioneer settlers and the Indians in the territory. It allowed settlers and farmers to encroach further into traditional Native American lands without fear. The U.S. Army slaughtered nearly the entire band of my people because of a few trouble spots between few Indians and encroaching settlers. Patrick Edward Connor, for his bravery, was promoted to Brigadier General. But that's not the end of the story. Maybe the bigger question we need to ask ourselves is, how do we reconcile the past? Our goal as archaeologists in history should be to work hard to uncover it and preserve it. All of it. All of the stories, both written and oral. But sometimes our attempts are often clouded by our own current beliefs and value systems that we all have. How then do we understand the past that may differ from our present views and beliefs? Historical perspective involves viewing the past through the social, intellectual, and emotional lenses of the time, to understand what was like for those who lived in it. When examining events like the Bear River Massacre, I think it's vital to center Indigenous voices to achieve an accurate and respectable interpretation of the past. For far too long, history has been written by the victors, often colonial powers leaving Indigenous experiences and perspectives erased or misrepresented. The massacre of my people at Bear River in 1863 is one such event that, despite its historical reports, remains largely forgotten or ignored by mainstream narratives. Recent efforts, I think, including my book, have brought to light the story from a Shoshone perspective. The Indigenous voices provide essential context to this and other violent historical episodes, not only as a corrective to the dominant narrative, but as a way to humanize the victims and the survivors of these atrocities. Indigenous people have a unique cultural and spiritual and ancestral ties to the land, as you've heard today, which influence how we understand history. For the Shoshone people, the Bear River Massacre isn't just a tragic historical event. It's an ongoing trauma that continues to shape the identity and collective memory of our people today. By centering Indigenous voices, archaeologists and historians can better understand the significance of such events in a broader context of Indigenous resistance, survival, and healing. It also acknowledges that history is not static. It lives on in the descendants of those who have been most affected by that trauma. Collaboration with Indigenous communities is essential because it ensures that the work of archaeology is not only culturally sensitive, but also aligns with the values and needs of those communities. The Bear River Massacre Sites, for example, holds a deep emotional and spiritual tie to my tribe. Research in such places should be guided by the affected community, respecting their wishes about how the story is told and how artifacts are handled. Involving Indigenous voices from the outset of archaeological work ensures that their history is not commodified or treated as mere data, but honored as a living narrative. Indigenous-led collaborations in archaeology can lead to a more complete and nuanced understanding of historical events. Archaeology can uncover physical evidence of massacres or other forms of violence. But these findings often lack context without Indigenous interpretation. For example, the physical events of the massacre site may tell us how the people died, but only the stories passed down by the survivors and the descendants can tell us why it happened and how it has affected their community. This holistic approach to archaeology acknowledges that artifacts and physical remains are part of the story. Oral traditions, cultural knowledge, and indigenous expertise are equally crucial in telling the full story. Looking forward, archaeology has the potential to be a bridge to a better future by fostering reconciliation and healing. As more indigenous communities are brought into the fold of archaeological research, they gain greater control over their history and can work to correct the historical record. For non-indigenous people, this collaborative approach provides an opportunity to teach hard history with honesty and humility. The role of archaeologists, then, is not merely to dig up the past, but to ensure that the stories that are unearthed are told in ways that honor the voices of those who lived them. Ultimately, archaeology can be a tool for justice by shedding light on forgotten and hidden stories. It can often challenge the dominant narrative that often seeks to minimize or erase the experiences of indigenous peoples. Archaeologists have a responsibility to approach their work not as a scientific endeavor, but as a form of ethical practice that acknowledges the humanity of those stories that they are uncovering. In this way, archaeology can help build a more inclusive future, where the past is understood through the diverse voices of those who lived it. Teaching hard history requires a commitment to telling the truth, even when the truth is painful. Events like this massacre, where hundreds of Shoshone people were slaughtered, is one of the most violent episodes in U.S. history. That story must be told with accuracy and honesty. In many cases, history has been whitewashed or softened to make difficult truths easier to digest for certain audiences. But this doesn't serve justice to the real victims of those events and their descendants. And it prevents us from learning the whole scope of what happened. Archaeologists, historians, and educators must work together to ensure that the facts are not diluted, but instead preserved and presented with integrity. Including indigenous narratives are essential to understanding events like the massacre, but they provide the human dimension often missing from the historical account. Too often, historical accounts from the perspective of the settlers, the soldiers, or the government dominate the narrative, while the lived experiences and ongoing trauma of indigenous peoples are sidelined. By teaching hard history with commitment to these stories, we give voice to those who are directly affected and whose descendants still carry the weight of those tragedies today. Teaching hard history, especially traumatic events, involves deep, emotional, and ethical considerations. Students and educators must understand that discussing events like the massacre, events like forced relocation, boarding schools, cultural erasure, brings with it emotional weight. For Native American communities, these are not just abstract historical events. They are deeply personal, and they cause pain across generations. As teachers and archaeologists, we need to create a space for students to process emotions while maintaining a respectable environment. It's crucial to teach with privity, allowing students to grapple with the painful truths of history without becoming overwhelmed or desensitized. The ethical considerations also extend to the way we approach the physical remnants of these hard histories. Archaeology often deals with sensitive sites, mass graves, ceremonial grounds, or locations tied to violence and death. When excavating or studying these places, archaeologists must act with the most respect for the people who lived, who died, and have ongoing ties with the cultural area. Teaching students to approach their work with this kind of reverence is key to ethical practices in archaeology. We must instill in our students the idea that they are not merely studying objects or data, but they are engaging with legacies of real people whose stories deserve to be treated with dignity. Archaeology can play a role in truth-telling by uncovering evidence that either supports or challenges historical narratives. In many cases, physical evidence uncovered by you serves as a corrective to the written history. By unearthing artifacts, remains, and environmental data, archaeologists provide concrete evidence needed to develop a more fuller and accurate version of many of those events. For example, the Bear River Massacre was long downplayed in American history and treated as a minor skirmish rather than a massacre. It wasn't until archaeological evidence and indigenous oral histories came together that the true scope of the violence was finally recognized. Teaching students how archaeology can uncover these truths helps them understand their critical role in finding evidence in challenging dominant histories. Archaeology doesn't just fill the gap. It shines a light on the part of history that some would prefer to remain hidden. Teaching students to engage in hard history through archaeology involves fostering an ethical approach to storytelling. This means being mindful of how we frame the narratives that emerge from our research. While evidence may speak to certain facts, the interpretation of the evidence requires careful consideration for the people whose stories we are telling. For indigenous communities, there is often a fine line between honoring the past and reopening the wounds. We must work together in partnership with indigenous communities to ensure that the narratives they construct from archaeology findings align with the cultural and emotional needs of those communities. Ethical storytelling requires transparency about the limitations of archaeology, research, and evidence. Sometimes I think there's a potential to over-interpret findings in ways that align with contemporary narratives or political agendas. Teaching students the importance of restraint, humility, and collaboration in their interpretation is essential. We must show them that archaeology is not about creating definitive answers, but should be about creating an ongoing dialogue about the past, one that always includes the voices of those whose ancestors experienced those hardships. One of the most important lessons that we can teach through the study of hard history is empathy. When students engage with stories of suffering, resiliency, and survivance that are found in indigenous history, they begin to understand the human cost of those historical events. Teaching hard history is not about transmitting facts. It's about fostering a deeper understanding of how those histories affect real people, both in the past and in today. Encouraging students to empathize with those who suffered in events like the Bear River Massacre helps create a more compassionate and socially responsible approach to the study of our profession. Empathy also helps students develop a stronger ethical compass as they approach their future work in archaeology or related fields. By understanding the emotional weight of history, students are more likely to approach with the respect and the care that it requires. They become more attuned to the needs of those communities they work with and are more committed to ensuring that their work honors the lives and the cultures that they are studying. And finally, I was afraid this would be way too heavy. I'm sorry. Teaching hard history through archaeology offers a unique opportunity to confront the past in a tangible way. While historical documents and accounts provide important context, there is something powerful about physically uncovering the remnants of the past. When students participate in archaeological work on the sites like the massacre and other places, in places of trauma, they directly engage with the legacy of those events. This can be a deeply moving and transformative experience, one that connects them to history in ways that books and lectures cannot. Archaeology, when done ethically and collaboratively, can be a force of truth-telling and reconciliation. It allows us to confront the hard histories that many would prefer to forget. But in doing so, it offers us a path forward. By teaching students to approach these stories with accuracy and respect, we help ensure that the lessons of the past are not lost, but are used to create a more just and inclusive future. As we confront these hard histories of the past, we need to recognize the role of you. And your role is not just to uncover the past, but to ensure that it's told truthfully and respectfully. Archaeology, when practiced with integrity and in collaboration with the communities, indigenous communities, can be a power to expose the truths that have long been buried, both literally and metaphorically. By carefully and ethically interpreting these histories, archaeologists can help societies confront a dark past sometimes, acknowledging their pain and trauma caused by violence and colonialism. This process of truth-telling is essential in honoring the lives that were lost and ensuring that their stories are never forgotten or misrepresented. When the truth is finally acknowledged, when the stories of the massacre, removals, and cultural erasures are finally told, there is a space for collective healing to begin. By listening to and working with indigenous peoples, we become partners in this healing process. We can help rewrite the narrative in a way that honors the resiliency of those survivors. Ultimately, teaching and understanding hard history is not just about reckoning with the past, it's building a more hopeful future. As we confront these painful truths, we create communities for healing. In honoring the lost lives, the voices that were silenced, we foster a society that learns from its mistakes, one that is committed to justice, understanding, and unity. And through this work, we can find hope in the possibility that hard history, when told truthfully, can lead to healing and a more compassionate world for future generations. Thank you very much. Q&A, did anybody have some questions?
Yeah,
I do not want to stand in front of anybody at lunch either, so look at me. I never miss a lunch.
Does anybody have any questions about what you read in the book or anything that Darren said today?
That book is a thing. My grandmother always wanted to write the book. If you want a good read, Google May Timbimbu Perry. You could read for days about her. She wanted to write a book, but she got Parkinson's, and she just couldn't do it. So I told her, Grandma, one day I'll write your book for you. So it's an honor to her. One person in the back, and then Elaine. Yeah.
You use the term students, and you say to create empathy, teach hard history, to create empathy. In your opinion, what age do you believe that should begin?
Oh my gosh, early. Last year I went to 70 elementaries, and just to donate my time, and I never turned down an opportunity. You invite me, I'll come. And I just take artifacts and a few things to share with the students. And obviously I don't get into the weeds or down rabbit holes about the massacre with 4th graders in Utah history. But I talk about the culture and how we honor the land. I want them to understand who we are as a people. And the tragic events and things that, they can learn later. But I always just try to keep it on a level that I think they can understand. But let me tell you this though, I met a 4th grade class at the Daughters of Utah Pioneers Monument. I always like to start there. We don't end up there, but we start there. So I want the kids to read the plaque, and I want to teach them about historical perspective. And it's a great place to do it, but there was a tree there. There's a tree right next to it. It's a big Russian olive, and people hang things in it. I call it an honor tree, because I don't know what else to call it. But there's teddy bears and dream catchers and ribbons, all kinds of things as tokens to where people left. And we're standing there looking at this tree, me and 50 4th graders and their teachers. And a boy in the class said, hey, I see a mirror hanging in the tree. Why do you think there's a mirror hanging in the tree? I was stumped. I was trying to come up with something clever to answer him, but I couldn't. I had no idea. And a girl, the smallest girl in the class standing right next to me, she said, I know why. That mirror is there to remind us that we did this. And if we don't learn from history, we could do it again. I looked at the teacher, and the teacher goes, but my hair on my neck was standing up. I mean, it was such a transformative moment for me. Man, I was taught by a 4th grader that day a lesson about, I thought, maybe I don't need to dumb it down so much when I'm talking to these 4th graders, because she got it, and she understood the significance and the importance of learning about hard history. I've always found that you can talk about hard history with anybody. Yesterday, I came down a couple of days early, and yesterday I spoke in 2 classes here on campus, a history class and another class. But I found, as we engage and talk about hard history, we can do that. But for me, it's pushing it to the edge of uncomfortableness, and I hope you felt a little uncomfortable during the massacre talk. But then I don't leave it there. And I'm not angry about it, because for me it's more about, we all go through tragic events through life, don't we? We're all going to have events in life that challenge us. They shouldn't define us though, and what should define us is our reaction to those events and our integrity. So for me, it's about acknowledging hard history, feeling bad about it if we need to, but then asking the question, we can't do anything about it, but what can we do together to make this world a better place? Together, let's collaborate. We don't always see eye to eye, but let's do this together and make this world better. So I find when you do that, it just ends up way better. I have a Ute friend, a great Ute friend, but he's so angry all the time, and he wants to hold everybody accountable, and he won't just let it go. And I said to him one day, I said his name, and I won't say his name, but I said, Sean said, he wouldn't care. I said, Sean, you speak so loudly that people can't hear you. And I just meant to say, you know, if you don't have to be, you can be angry, and rightfully so, but you got to give people space to process it and then say, you know, that wasn't me, it may be my descendants, but let's figure this out, see what we can do. So I think when we approach art history that way, it becomes way more digestible for everybody. So Elaine, my dear friend.
I was wondering, you know, in working with students and young ones, especially American Indian children, talking about some of these events is very close to their hearts. They see it on their homelands. They hear the stories in their family lines. As a child, you heard these stories from your grandmother. How, as a child, were you able to comprehend and to be able to resolve some of the anger, some of the confusion that humans do to each other?
I wish I could say there was a magic thing that I did and I was young when I figured it out, but I wasn't young when I figured it out. It took years of me processing. My grandmother would take me up there all the time, and her grandfather, who she knew really good, was 12 years old during the massacre and played dead, and that's the only way he survived. Well, she'd spread out this Pendleton blanket on the edge of the bluff, and she'd point out, that's where grandfather played dead, right over there. That's where the village was. This is where all our people still lie today, because nobody was ever buried. And I mean, as a young child, I didn't have those feelings of anger. I didn't know how to process that. So I was just hearing stories and stories about Angie Chi. But as I got older and I started learning about it more, and I became more angry about, this is tough and nothing's been done. And in my book, I write about Washakie, that town. I thought the LDS Church gave us the land. And then come to find out, they burned everybody out and took it back and sold it. And there's some heart-wrenching letters I include in the book. And they always say, we've lost everything, appealing to the church for something. And the church not responding with anything. But at the end of every one of those letters, they say, we still believe in the church. We don't hold the church responsible for this, but could you help us out? You burned everything we owned. And so there's all kinds of stories, and I just believe everybody is in certain places, and it's taken me a long time. And I think one of the things that's really helped me more than anything is being able to write about it, write my grandmother's words, and hear her, because she wasn't like me. She was still pretty angry. I think Chief Sagwitch, though, would have been, I think I'm more wired like him, because he was looking for ways to get along with the pioneers, always. But my grandmother, not so much. She went to her grave kind of still ticked off about it all. Yeah. And rightfully so. But it's just taken time to understand it and learn from it. I've learned so many beautiful lessons from the massacre, and I didn't share any of them, but one of them, I think the greatest thing I learned is to offer unconditional forgiveness. Man, if you don't do anything else in your life, practice unconditional forgiveness of those who offended you in some way. Because look, they offended you. They don't think about it every day. You're the one suffering, re-suffering and re-suffering. Why? Offer unconditional forgiveness and move on. It doesn't mean you need to forget, but you can offer unconditional forgiveness. The other thing I learned about the massacre that really helps me is everybody has a story worthy of being told. My grandmother would always say that. What is your story going to be? because your story is as important as anybody else's. And as we preserve history, I think everybody's perspective is important. This, what you heard today, is mine. But if you have a differing opinion, your perspective and value is just as important as mine. I believe when we come together as a society, though, and share all these different perspectives and ideas, man, I think then we can really make good decisions, because we have a lot of different things to think about and ponder. And sometimes we even change our minds. Sometimes.
Darren for
I hope that
president.
for the legislature.
Darren for president.
I ran for Congress and as a Democrat in Utah, so you know how that turned out for me. Blake Moore is our congressman in Utah now, and I'm not, so. Yeah, back there. Yeah.
Okay, so in the book, there's an incident where you're talking to some children about leadership, about a chief, being a chief and what it means to be a chief, and I really like what you
It's
said
my
about
favorite
leadership.
story.
Could you share that?
Yeah, and so I'd go to my grandmother's home a lot, and it smelled like buckskin, smoked buckskin. I mean, just, I thought all grandma's homes smelled that way, and I write about that in the book, but they don't. But up on her mantle, she had a beautiful headdress, all eagle feathers, and it sat there, and I'd just stare at it. And she'd talk to me about chiefs and the importance of leadership and community and family. And one day I said, Grandma, I want to be a chief. I absolutely want to be a chief when I grow up. And she told me this story. And I don't know if she made it up or just, if she did, it's a great story. We don't make up stories, right, Virgil? So she said,
Coyote's fault.
Always. She said, well, sit down, let me tell you this story. And she said, when a young Shoshone boy or girl does an act of kindness or service, the chief in the tribe would give that boy or girl one eagle feather. She then said to me, what do you think would happen if that boy or girl kept doing kind things? I said, well, they'd probably get more eagle feathers. She said, you're right. She said, what if that boy or girl kept doing kind things for years until they became an adult? What do you think would happen? And I said, well, by then they'd probably have a lot of eagle feathers. She said, you're correct. And she said, you know, the chief is always the chief until they pass to the next world. And it's just a passing to another world. It's not something we fear or worry about or is sad. But the chief, when he gets ready to pass, he'll call everybody together. And he or she, I always include our women now because our women are so important to us. And we can have female leaders today in our tribal cultures. And so I said, the chief calls everybody together and he will say, I'm about to meet my maker. I need to select a new chief. I want all of you to pull out your eagle feathers and show them to me. And she said, it's the person that had the most eagle feathers would become the new chief. She told me the chief isn't the bravest or the toughest or the strongest. The chief is the one who led a life of service and kindness throughout his whole life. And so she told me that day, go be a chief today. I always end every elementary school visit with the kids to that. And now I preface it by saying, now, there's probably not very many Shoshones in this room, so you're not going to be a Shoshone chief. But if you live your life that way, you'll become a leader in your community. Leadership that's not rooted in power and authority, but in service and kindness and wisdom. And that's the kind of leaders this world needs today. And so I just have to tell you one experience because I shared it with the class yesterday. Last year, a teacher at the end of the year sent me a text message of just a picture. And it was the back wall of her classroom. And it was full of these beautiful colored paper eagle feathers. And she said, I just want to tell you about our kids and the experience they had when you told them that story. They came in and said, we need to do something like that in our class. So we came up with the idea of printing out paper eagle feathers. And when a person did something kind or nice, They couldn't nominate themselves. Somebody had to nominate them. Say, so-and-so did something really kind for me. Well, that person got to put their name on the feather, color it, and put it on the wall. There had to have been thousands of paper eagle feathers on that wall. And then the next text said, I've been teaching 26 years, and you have no idea what impact that story had on this group of students. And our class went from being a normal, everyday 4th grade class to one that everybody was looking for a way to serve somebody. Every minute of the day they were at school going forward. Man, that was a payday for 70 elementaries. Well, hundreds and hundreds of elementaries I've gone to so far. But man, if we can instill that kind of thought processes in our students today, and I know Elaine does that every day in her work in the Nebo School District. She's a warrior. Yeah.
Just an observation for you, you know, in the songs that you heard with the drum group, you know, those are things that we hang our hat on as natives, those songs. It brings us to what Darren is saying. And so we feel the spirit when those songs are sung, and we understand the significance and the prayers that go with it. You know, we don't have to wait 7 days to go pray or, you know, whatever. So we go to those ceremonials that we have, and we understand it. We know that the spirit is there. That's how we keep in contact with the Creator. You don't have to go to a building, whatever, because this whole world is like a church to us every day. So that's us, natives. You know, Ojibwe people the same way. People that live on Turtle Island, we're all the same way. And when we gather together in various ceremonies, we understand all that. We honor people, we understand all that. So that's what keeps us grounded. So I just thought I'd mention that to you, so you can kind of get a sense of who we are as Native people.
Thank you, Mark.
Another question here?
Yeah, just a follow-up, you, in your talk, kind of started to touch on how important the land is to your people. And then, so I look at the gruesome deaths and recognize death is the way of the world, but the loss of land is you're still suffering that. How
Land is identity. It's, I mean, we look at land the way we look at our relative. When my grandmother would go on plant walks with me, she would talk about the rocks and the plants and the water as our non-human kinfolk. Well, who's kin? It's your relative. So I talk about land like I talk about my mother or grandmother. That relationship, it's our relative. And so it's easy to take care of the environment when you look at it as our relative, as opposed to a commodity that can be bought or sold. Completely different relationship. And so Native peoples, as Virgil said, we've always looked at that land. That's why land and language is such an important part of our identity and who we are. I've learned so much from elders that have taught me so many beautiful lessons about the importance of land. And I think that is resonating with people around the world even. I mean, hell, who gets to go to Copenhagen and talk? I mean, about indigenous perspective. I just think, and it's not me, it's just that indigenous knowledge that's been there for thousands of years. And I just get to get up and talk about it. But any Native could, if they're into their culture, like they should be. It's not new, but I think it's gonna save the world, honestly.
It's just so different from my perspective where land is all about who owns it. And so it changes the perspective of how we care for it, because it's not for everyone, it's just my little piece, or, and so I was really interested again in the book and how much of it was devoted to how tragic was the loss of that land, and how you're going forward when that was tied around possession, and now that possession is gone, and you still have this respect for the land around you.
I'm in the middle of I'm writing another book, and I'm about halfway done, but it's more indigenous. It'll be entitled Tending the Sacred, an indigenous perspective to the land. And so, I don't know, I don't talk a lot about the Bear River Massacre anymore. People ask me to talk about the environment, and I just think that's kind of the time we're in right now. So, I had an interesting talk to the dean of the business school at the U, though. I told him that the capitalistic system wasn't sustainable at a luncheon. And I said, but I'm smart enough to know that we're not getting rid of capitalism anytime soon. But we ought to create a hybrid model. And he said, tell me what that looks like. And I've been thinking about it a little bit. So I said, and we were out at the U, and the mountain was right there. I said, your system says I can take that piece of land over there, I can buy it, I can extract it, I can deplete it, I can develop it, I can destroy it for the sake of short-term profits. Your system allows me to do that. Maybe we should start asking ourselves, just because we can, should we? And at what cost is it going to come to future generations? Let's put a cost on the things that we don't put a cost on. Let's put a dollar figure on the pollution it's going to create, or the water it's going to deplete. Start putting a cost on that stuff, and start adding it up 10, 20 years down the road. The cost of what our kids are going to have to pay. Maybe that wasn't such a great idea. And then now, so as we go develop, I'm not anti-development at all, but I'm anti-wrong development. We got to start governing like the Iroquois and many tribal nations do, looking 7 generations ahead before we make any decisions. Then make a decision. But if it's going to adversely affect our children and our grandchildren, then maybe we shouldn't do it. Yeah.
So I have a question about going to your work in elementary schools. The Utah fourth grade standards for social studies are, I would consider, like hard history standards. Do you find that when you're invited by schools, are teachers asking you specifically what to speak on, or are they just inviting you to share your experience freely in your kind of your work?
Just one teacher has told me what I can speak on in Kaysville, at Burton Elementary. And she talked to me crying about it. She said, I am scared to death that if I say the wrong thing, I will lose my job tomorrow. She goes, I've been teaching 26 years or 27 years, and I'm that afraid of losing my job. But none of the other schools do. I spoke at like Corner Canyon Junior High, the whitest school I've ever been in. I'm not kidding you. I'm sitting there and the 7th graders are filing in, and they all look the same. I mean, where's a person of color at all in this community? And I said, I'm gonna get not invited back ever again, and you're gonna get fired. I said that to the social studies teacher, because I'm gonna lay it out. I mean, I talked about the massacre, I talked about hard things. He goes, don't worry about it. And so I thought, well, I'm not gonna hear about it, but you're gonna hear about it. It was a whole 7th grade in the assembly, and haven't heard anything, and they invited me back, so don't know what that means. But most teachers are pretty good about, I've been doing it for a long time, so I think they know that what they're gonna get. And I hope my book gets banned by the legislature. School districts. That would be a badge of honor. I spend a lot of time at the legislature. And I go home at night having to take a big shower. That's trauma.
Yeah.
That's trauma work, so.
Welcome to
I'm
Utah.
not, sorry, I
Okay,
figured I have
we
to
gotta
move.
go.
I'm sorry, everyone.
So-
but These are great questions, and I hope you can keep.
Well, I'm not
going
going
with
anywhere
this
today, so I'll be around.
conversation. Isn't he
Thank you.
wonderful?
Yes.
I hope to be as good of a historian as he is, and as articulate as he is.
Thank you.
I don't have a turtle purse for you, but I do have a necklace that was made by an SUU alum and a member of the band, the senior band for Pikes.
I love them. They're good people.
Yeah, so I'm not gonna wear it now, it might clash with your wardrobe, but.
I don't care. Still one more on.
With his love. Okay. Thank you, Darren. Wow, I feel so full. I mean, I know you're feeling that. You have to be feeling. I'm feeling all the fullness right now. And again, I feel so much love. I don't know. I feel all of you, and I feel this love that you're carrying with you here, and I appreciate that. It's kind of a gift. So thank you. Okay. We will now adjourn to our lunch, and we are having that catered out in this front hallway, so you can get all your things. I tried to order things that everyone could eat, so I'm hoping that actually works out. And so instead of, you're welcome to come back in here and eat, but if you would like a table, there are tables outside, if you'd like to get outside. There's some picnic tables out there in the front, and there are tables in our workshop room in this corner, the shoe star room, and there are some tables in the Yankee Meadows room. So if you'd like to disperse around, you're welcome to. If you'd like to come back in here or outside, feel free. And we will return back here pretty promptly.